What's up, people? I'm Shaggy, the Opinionated Hippie, and today I'm going to be ranking and reviewing the albums of Primus. First, Primus sucks. Second, I started this channel to do all things Zappa. Zappa's concept of the big note. Eventually, we arrived there. Primus had a cover band in 90, 91, maybe as late as 92, called Caca, C-A-C-A. Played in the Bay Area. Saw them a couple times. Not a very good Zappa cover band. Definitely one of the least musically taking chances Zappa cover bands I've ever seen. It was more of a just like, let's have fun and mess around with Zappa. Primus also had, I know they've covered Dumb All Over. That's the only Zappa song I know they played live. But most importantly, despite those other connections, I challenge anyone to go find a review of a Primus album or an overview of Primus as a band that does not name drop Zappa somewhere in that review. Obviously, they have a sense of humor. They have some somewhat complicated music and complex rhythms that have that Zappa connection. There's an overall sort of irreverent, slightly satirical, kind of like everybody's up for being jabbed at type attitude that Zappa has. So musically, Primus is definitely more funk driven. You know, they have thrash roots, so they dip into their thrash every once in a while. They're definitely driven by like Les Claypool's like galloping bass style, and they definitely have a sound. But I think the overall attitude in the music of the sort of the always present sense of humor, or almost always present sense of humor, I think makes it somewhat of a good, strong Zappa connection. Personally, Primus was probably the first band I ever fell in love with that was not like a huge band. They weren't already known. I had the great fortune of going to school in the Bay Area in the late 80s, early 90s when Primus was an up-and-coming band. Saw them in all kinds of clubs around Berkeley and Oakland mainly. Went over to the city, to San Francisco a couple times. Berkeley Square, 924 Gilman, the Omni, just great. And they were usually bills. It was like 3 or 4 local metal thrash bands, and Primus was usually in that mix, so they usually stood out as different from the other bands, but then also as just a ridiculously good band. They played, there was a place in Berkeley, a co-op called Barrington Hall. They mention it in Frizzle Fry. If Barrington starts to breathe again, it might just take us all away. Really bad at lyrics. But they mentioned Barrington Hall in Frizzle Fry. And it was a co-op that had been shut down a couple times because of drug activities, the selling and use of, and rampant on both ends. And when it got shut down the final time, they had one of their infamous Electric Kool-Aid acid parties with Electric Kool-Aid acid, and Primus played. And so we attended the party. I got my fill of Electric Kool-Aid. I wandered around the co-op for a while, found myself in front of the stage at some point, and I just climbed. There was a huge, I'm assuming it was a bass amp, but it might have been a speaker. I think it was maybe just a speaker. But there was a huge speaker right on the side of the stage, and I just climbed on top of it and sat cross-legged and waited for Primus to start, and probably sat there for a good half hour before the band started. But nobody asked me to leave, and nobody kicked me off, and so by far one of the best shows I've ever seen in my life was Barrington Hall. This must have been like 91, maybe 90. I think it was like my sophomore or junior year, maybe my freshman year. I don't know, but it was around 90. And yeah, just saw them play Barrington Hall at this Electric Kool-Aid party. The last show ever at Barrington, this quite infamous place in Berkeley, and absolutely amazing. And I was just kind of, I remember I was looking down on Les, and Les is pretty tall. So the stage, it must have been a speaker. The speaker was pretty high up. It might have been on something else. All I remember is sitting there and having the friggin' time of my life. So yeah, absolutely love this band. Have been with them, what I would say, from the start. Very fortunate to see them. Used to play pool with them at Town and Country Pool Hall right there on University Avenue in Berkeley. I don't know if that's there anymore. And I used to work at a sandwich shop, The Stuffed Inn in Berkeley. And I think Larry would come in I don't think Les ever came in, but Larry came in that sandwich shop a couple times, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, so anyways, they were just around. They were like dudes in your local band who eventually made it big. So that's pretty cool. So I always feel like I have a special, I feel connected to them in a really awesome way. Green Day was also up and coming in Berkeley in that time. Never got on the Green Day train, though it is a band I saw a handful of times before they made it big. So that was pretty cool. Bay Area in the late 80s, early 90s was pretty ridiculous, especially if you're into thrash, because everybody wanted to be the next Metallica. So the thrash scene was really, really strong, but there was just a lot of fantastic music back then. And Primus was the one I think I hopped on the hardest, and hopped on the hardest, very weird analogies there. Went and saw the Red Hot Chili Peppers at the Fillmore, only because Primus was opening. Never been that much of a Chili Peppers fan. Definitely am not now. Wasn't in the beginning. Just not my style of funk. But we went and saw Primus because they opened. We went and saw the Chili Peppers because Primus opened, and both shows were actually really, really, really good. So yeah, anyways, but that's it. I'm going to rank their albums. I think they're all Primus sounding albums. The rankings are pretty much how well I like any given song and my experience with those albums, but all of them sound like Primus. So like, if you don't like one of them at all because you just don't like the way the bass sounds or the singer sounds or the attitude, you're probably not going to like any of them. But if you can hop on board on at least one, I think there are many other in the catalog that are worth checking out. And I would say there's one that is an outright classic, 3 that are pretty darn great, a couple that are just good to great, and then 2 that are like, but yeah, anyways, but that's it. I'm going to stop yakking about Primus and get on to my opinions about their albums. Starting with, I think we have 9 of them. Number 9 now. Number 9 is 2014's, I want to get this name right, Primus and the Chocolate Factory with the Fungi Ensemble. I blame my dislike for this album, and I'm going to call it a dislike. It is the only album I kind of just don't like, but it's not Primus's fault. It sounds like Primus. There are moments on here which are actually quite funky and quite good. But because of Johnny Depp, and because of what Johnny Depp did to that movie with the help of Tim Burton, I just can't. Anything other than Gene Wilder and the original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I just don't want any part of. Like, I'm getting into like some good funk grooves on here, and then they start singing like an Oompa Loompa song, or I realize it's pure imagination. Or Larry tries to sing, I mean, he does, but you judge how well he does it. It's fun. I Want It Now, wasn't that the Veruca Salt song? So yeah. What they did was essentially they took the soundtrack album of the original movie and didn't do like a straight cover of it because they changed the titles, but they captured like the vibe of each song and turned it into this. But after Johnny Depp ruined that, it's just like, nobody should touch the songs. Adult men, adult women, nobody needs to be playing these songs. Do it in like a kid's production or something. Mo did some Charlie and the Chocolate Factory stuff. I think it was Halloween back in '99, if I'm not mistaken. And again, I don't want to hear you all of a sudden going into an Oompa Loompa song. It's just, no. I love that original movie, but keep it in the movie. Who else? Somebody else did a Charlie and the Chocolate Factory thing recently. Can't remember who else it was, but it was one of those things I'm like, just don't do it. But Mo, darn. But anyways, I'll remember it later on, and then I'll mention it. But anyways, yeah, just don't touch it, man. Stick with the original. And for that, I just can't listen to this album because I'm reminded of the original movie and all the disaster. Oh, A Tribe Called Quest. They dropped in, they actually made it work, because what they did was at the end of the opening track for the one that they put out, their final album, The Space Program, I think was the name of the song. They drop in, I think it's the quote that Wilder does when they're on the boat, like all the crazy weird stuff. But then after they finish that quote, which works, they play a little bit of Oompa Loompa Doop. They play a little bit of the song. It's like, oh man, like you completely ruined what is a ridiculously fantastic track. Didn't completely ruin it. It is still a ridiculously fantastic track, but it would be better had they not dropped that song. So yeah, I don't like what Johnny Depp did to that movie, and for that reason, don't mess with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I'm done. Number 9, this album. Number 8 is 1999's Antipop. I failed to mention this before, but Primus is a trio, pretty much driven by Les Claypool's bass, his very cartoonish, quirky singing voice, his incredible expertise. We're talking like, let's put him up there with Geddy Lee on like the pantheon of all-time great bass players. A very galloping sort of style in which he can drive a song just like dun, 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 like a very, just like a lot of songs that have this almost the same rhythm, but a very bass-driven marching type rhythm. You have Larry Lalonde on guitar, who very much plays off of Les and like fills the spaces that Les doesn't, or like lays accents over things, or drops killer solos, or sometimes leans into thrash. Very seldom is Larry driving a song. You know, usually he is just sort of like, if he does drive it early, he usually gets taken over by the drums and bass at some point. And then you have Tim Herb Alexander on drums, in and out of the band, while there were a couple other drummers that stepped in. And one of those drummers was Brain, who is on this album, number 8, Antipop. This album also has a bunch of other guests on it. Tom Morello is on it. Hetfield from Metallica is on it. Jim Martin from Faith No More. Tom Waits makes a repeat performance. And so there is somewhat of a like, it feels like they recorded a bunch of songs in a time period and then just put them on an album instead of like recording an album. I think a lot of their albums have a pretty good flow where they start kind of strong and concerty, like big stage stuff. They get brown and weirdy in the middle, and then they usually end kind of jammy and drawn out. And so there's a nice, like, not predictable, but there's a nice, they know how to sequence an album. This one just feels like it's a bunch of songs, and some of them are really good and some of them aren't. One of the, I don't know if it's bad, but there's an intro, and then the second song is Electric Uncle Sam. And even though it sounds very much like Primus, kind of sounds like generic Primus and feels like something Funkadelic had done in the 70s already. Natural Joe, Lacquerhead, the Antipop, like the first 5 songs, like when I'm listening to them, I enjoy them, but they're not really memorable. Kind of reminds me of late period Deep Purple, like the Steve Morse era, where like, there are certain albums where like, when I'm done listening to them, I'm like, okay, that was whatever. Nothing really stuck with me. But while I'm listening to them, almost every song has a ridiculous groove somewhere in it. We're like, okay, I'm glad I stuck around for this because this is really good, even though it's only like a minute and a half of like a 4 or 5 minute song. You know, I might not care about the verses and the chorus, but those jams, give them to me. That's kind of the way I feel about some of the material on this album. The middle third is pretty solid. Eclectic Electric I like, which I think has a, I think it's the one that has like a Pink Floyd, like a One of These Days meets Happiest Days of Our Lives meets a little bit of Set the Controls type vibe, a longer song. I kind of like that. Greet the Sacred Cow, Mama Didn't Raise No Fool is a fun one that has a nice guitar intro, which again, once the, I think Morello plays on this one, that once the guitar intro is over, kind of just gets taken over by the bass and drums. And Dirty Drowning Man, which sounds like a Police song. I think it was produced by Stuart Copeland, but it reminds me of somebody else, but I can never put my finger on it. And then the rest of it, Ballad of Bodacious, Power Mad, Final Voyage, Coattails of a Dead Man are good when I'm listening to them, but they don't linger. But one of the best things on here, there's a hidden track. At the end of the final track, there is a studio version of The Heckler, which appeared on Suck on This, their original vinyl live album, which they sold at shows, from a Berkeley Square show, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, and that might be the best thing on the album is That Heckler. It's just a matter of opinion. It's just a matter of opinion, or whatever he says. That's a good song, The Heckler, but that's a hidden track. It's not even listed anywhere on there. That maybe album should be higher. Should be higher for having The Heckler, but punished for not acknowledging that it has The Heckler. So yeah, that's it. Number 8, Antipop. Number 7 is 2017's The Desaturating Seven. I think this is the shortest album of theirs. It's less than 40 minutes. It's like 7 tracks. It's based on a children's book by an Italian author, The Rainbow Goblins. Sadly, I have not read that book as a kindergarten teacher. I probably need to track that down just because. And it's a pretty, kind of reminds me of Pink Floyd's The Final Cut. It is definitely the most low-key, understated, chill album that Primus has. It's also their shortest, so it gives it a chiller vibe, I think. But throughout a couple of the songs, they might be chapters in the book, or who knows, but the 7 songs are called The Valley, The Seven, The Track, The Scheme, The Dream, The Storm, The Ends with a question mark. Each track kind of feels like the title of the song. Like The Valley seems like maybe you're emerging out of a valley or traveling slowly through one. The Seven is very much of a theme type song. A nice little funk groove in there. The Track, long, feels like a track. It is the longest track on the album. That has a really good funk part in the middle. The Scheme, you know, things are getting weird. People are planning stuff. The Dream, which has some, again, goes off into weird places. I think that has a nice funk groove in it. The Storm, which I think literally has storm sound effects. And The Ends. And so for the most part, it's kind of chill. And it's kind of very low key for Primus. And they're definitely playing with a little more atmospherics than normally. And this is the 3 original members. Alexander is on drums with this. And there's a narrator. So like that is one thing that I wish wasn't there, but there's a narrator on the opening track who says something about the Goblin Master or something. But I don't think there's no return of narration after that. So it's definitely, it sounds like Primus at times, but it's definitely something that's a little in a different left field to the rest of their sort of shortstop, third base play, or not shortstop, first base play, left field. Yeah, you know what I mean. I'm not a big baseball fan, but I know my fields and my bases. But anyways, yeah, but it's really good. And I think it's very concise and sort of purposeful. And there's not a lot of like fluff. There's not a lot of excess. And there's something really nice about this. That's sort of restrained. And it is, if I'm not mistaken, their most recent one, right? Nothing has been released after this other than the EP, which they put out, which I'm not doing EPs. So yeah, it's a nice direction. It is 5 years ago that we got our last full-length album from them, but maybe we'll get another one soon. But anyways, yeah, I enjoy this. My number 7, The Desaturating Seven. Did not do that on purpose. Number 6 is Green Naugahyde, which came out, what, 2011? 2000, wow, the day after. Oh, no, I was thinking 2001. 2011. And this is just a fun album. On drums is Jay Lane. I think this is the only album he played drums on, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. And it's just a fun album. I think it's got really good energy. It definitely sounds like Primus from start to finish. It also might be a little like Antipop in that it doesn't have maybe as much of a cohesion as the rest of their albums do. But I really, really enjoy it. It starts off with this Prelude to a Crawl, which is this really like very quiet instrumental that goes into Hennepin Crawler. And Hennepin Crawler just has a really nice groove from the beginning and like just sets up really good. We're Primus. We're still doing our thing. You know, we know how to do this vibe and this groove better than anybody. Last Salmon Man, which is part of the Fisherman's Chronicles. Eternal Consumption, Engine, Tragedies Are Coming. Those are okay, decent. But then there's a really solid run of stuff in the middle. Again, the middle third of this, kind of like Antipop. Eyes of the Squirrel, Jilly's on Smack, Leave on Cleef, which is a shout out to the bad and the good, the bad, and the ugly. You think they would align more with the ugly. I think they should. You think Primus would do a song with the ugly. I think his character fit more of what they were, so it's interesting they went with Leave on Cleef. And then More on TV, which I think are just really good, solid, excellent songs. And then the rest of it, again, is just kind of Primus being Primus at their best. Green Ranger, Hoeing for the Man, Extinction Burst, and Salmon Man, which is like a little throwaway thing at the end. But yeah, like not great. this isn't an album I think I would give to somebody to like say, hey, you really got to get into this band. I don't think this is one that would like, is that definitively Primus that it would convince somebody. But if you like Primus, I think this is a really good, solid listen that I return to, you know, quite often when I listen to Primus. When I'm in the mood for Primus, I'm just as likely to put this album on as anything else on this list. The ones I've already discussed, maybe not. I got to be in the specific mood for those. Never that Chocolate Factory one. But the rest on, I'm like, any of these will give me my Primus fill. So yeah, number 6, Green Naugahyde. Number 5 is 97's Brown album. This is the first one with Brain. Herb Alexander has left the band, so this is what, their 5th studio album. And this one just has like I think the Brown album is a very suitable title. In Brown, if you're a Ween fan, and Brown usually describing their music like their shows that will start off really high energy and like a, you know, like rock star type thing. And then the middle third usually gets very brown and like just out there, and they take chances and do weird solos and get really indulgent and like don't seem like they don't even care that the audience is there, and they just like play to whatever it is they want to do. And then the ending, again, they kind of return to, you know, more upbeat type stuff or whatever. But there's a Brown part of it. And this whole album just kind of feels brown and a little bit different, and sometimes just riding those grooves nice and long and slow and just like indulgent and like, we're Primus, man. We can do whatever we want to do. There aren't as many like just pure high moments on this album, but I think the overall tone is really just works. And one of my favorite tracks is the opening, the return of Southington Willoughby, because it has this almost like Primus version of In the Flesh, where you can almost imagine like the lead singer being in front of like a crowd and like rallying them up in like some fascist, like mind-washing type manner. And it has that weird energy, but it's definitely not as hard-hitting or as like defiantly in your face as something like In the Flesh is, but it definitely has this, to me, it always feels a little like something's not right about this. It just feels a little subversive, and that kind of rides for me throughout the album. 15 songs, which again, I think if you cut it down to, it's a 56-minute album. If you cut 3 or 4 of the songs, I think you make a much better album. But some of the highlights, again, I think other than the opening, which is fantastic, a lot of the highlights are in that middle third. Camelback Cinema, which I love, kind of a weird one. Reminds me of, they right before this, or right, I think it was right after this, they released one of their EPs that had a cover of The Police's Behind My Camel. And this almost sounds like that. And I have to think that the name Camelback Cinema has to be a callback to that, because there are tones of that in here. And then on the following EP, they do a cover of that. So that might be a connection. Bob's Party Time Lounge, which kind of doesn't sound, musically doesn't sound like it would go with a song called Bob's Party Time Lounge, but definitely one of the better songs on here. Duchess in the Proverbial Mind Spread, Resting Bones, like that middle section of songs, I think is kind of lifts the middle up. And then the ending, again, is just some good Primus being Primus stuff. But and Arnie, the closing track, I think is also kind of calls back to that Southington Willoughby thing. So anyways, yeah, it's just it's a very Primus-y listen, like very rewarding. One of those that I think gets better the more I return to it. I think it has more secrets to reveal than a lot of the other ones. So it's one of those kind of albums. But yeah, really good. And what is this? Number 5. Brown album. The Brown album, or it's just Brown album, right? Yeah. Number 5, Brown album. Number 4, their second album, 1991, Sailing the Seas of Cheese. Took me a while to come around to this album, as you will find out in a couple of these segments. Their first album, I think, is ridiculously fantastic. And I was kind of disappointed in this one when it came out. I thought it was like playing into their quirky strengths more than playing into the band I had been seeing, which was definitely had come out of like a thrash scene, you know, a band that leaned into that kind of vibe. They were definitely going more of a cartoony pop vibe. I mean, Jerry was a race car driver. But over time, I've come to appreciate it a lot more. Though I still think, I will hold on to this. I'll just put this out there now, that Tommy the Cat with Tom Waits, as much of a boon as it was, as great as it was to like, you got Tom Waits on your album, and it's your second album as this relatively, low key, under the radar indie band. Well, I guess they're on the radar. You know what I'm saying? I just thought it was better. I didn't want Tom Waits on it. I thought the way Les performed that song live was so ridiculously fantastic that they undersold themselves as a band by having Tom Waits sit in, because Les pulls it off well live. So I was disappointed in that in the beginning, and I haven't really gotten over the fact that Waits is on here and not Claypool on Tommy the Cat. So Tom Waits helps sings Tommy the Cat on here, for those of you that didn't know. So yeah, anyways, there's that. But yeah, what else? It's got a just good typical, Primus, some Primus stompers. Here Come the Bastards, a good Primus stomper. Those Damn Blue Collar Tweakers, a good Primus stomper. Fish On is kind of stretched out as a nice little, like, starts low key and then builds up to a nice little middle Primus jam before getting low key again. 11 is in 11. What is it, like 1 2 3 1 2 3 dun 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 dun. It's a Primus stomper in 11. Sergeant Baker is kind of fun. American Life. They're all pretty good songs, and I have to admit, from start to finish, it's a really good listen. There's a couple little like shorter, like quirky in between type things that they would throw in there. Again, that's kind of a Zappa connection to Zappa's sort of like, shake your booty type stuff. Leather, those kind of weird little connecting things. But yeah, it's a solid album. But again, it just took me a while to sort of like come around to it, because my initial reaction was like, oh, this is not that band. I was one of those people, like, I want them to never change or be something different. So it took me a while to come around to it. And that was after the other albums had come out. And I was like, okay, you know what? They're actually pretty good. And then I went back and like, okay, this album isn't as bad as I originally thought. It's actually a really good album. And had I not had that initial experience, I might rank it higher. But yeah, it's a really, really solid listen. I think from Brown album on, these are all really, really great albums, with number 1 being outclasses all of them. But yeah, number 4, Sailing the Seas of Cheese. Number 3 is Pork Soda, their third studio album, released in 93. This is another one that probably would even be better if it was shorter. It is like almost an hour long, 3 or maybe cut off a couple tracks. But again, it's just your Primus being their best version of Primus, or not their best, but one of their best. Like just these very stomping rhythms. My name is Mud, just these stomping things. Some kind of dark lyrics on here. Bob is about somebody who took a rope and hung himself outside his front porch or front step or something like that. There's some really good grooves in here. DMV has almost like a couple good, like King Crimson 80s type, that bass guitar interplay type grooves that kind of seep into a couple of these songs. The Press Man, which was on their original live Suck on This, there's a studio version of here on this. A nice long jam that may be a little too indulgent at the end, Hamburger Train. But yeah, Welcome to This World, some quirky singing. But again, it's just really good Primus from start to finish. Like, again, a couple short songs. No, not really any short songs in here. One, The Air is Getting Slippery. Feels like some of them are short. Yeah, that instrumental, I guess 2.5 minute instrumental is not short. But anyways, it has a really good flow where you get like, I guess what are longer numbers with maybe shorter numbers that are instrumentals, or it's just, again, a well-composed album. Your typical Primus motifs pop up throughout the entire thing. We get Fisherman's Chronicles Part 3 and the old Diamondback Sturgeon. Yeah, just a really good one. But again, maybe a little too long, kind of gets wasty towards the end. Too many things that maybe don't need to be there. Could maybe knock it up. Maybe to number 2, never to number 1. But yeah, a really good album. Number 3, Pork Soda. Number 2 is 1995's Tales from the Punchbowl. Alexander would leave the band after this for a while. Yeah, this has the first 4 songs of this are just stupidly ridiculous And at that point, I don't care what happens next. But luckily, what happens next is also really good, including one of their more a nice acoustic, I think banjo flavor. I think he plays a banjo, yeah. Highlight, in which they sort of talk about, local back history type things. But yeah, the opening 4 songs are stupid good. Professor Nutbutter's House of Treats, which just sounds huge. It's got a little nice thrash jam. It's got everything Primus does condensed into like a nice 7 minutes. It feels like it should open every concert. It just has that magnificent, almost Mr. Bungle vibe at time, where they're touching so many musical elements, not as frantic or as hectic, but a little bit of that energy. Mrs. Blaylene, which is just a nice Primus upbeat funk song. Winona's Big Brown Beaver, which has one of the greatest, despite the horrible name, it just has one of the greatest funk grooves ever. And this song live, the energy is just so incredible good. But that energy is here in the studio version also. And then one of my favorite Primus songs, Southbound Pachyderm, which is just, it is so good that when the Claypool Lennon Delirium band plays live, this is, I think, always one of the Primus songs that they have played. I only think they've done 2 or 3, but they play this one, I think, at almost every show. At least every time I saw them, they played this song. A really slow, kind of spacey, maybe Pink Floyd-ish spacey type slower number that has, again, lifts up, kind of like the Fish On, where it's slow and then it has a nice high energy and then drops back down. But this one has a lot of tension and release in it, and it works so well. But everything else is just really good. Space Farm, Year of the Parrot, Hellbound 17 and a Half, Glass Sandwich, Del Davis Tree Farm, which is the nice little banjo number, really good lyrics. Deanne's a Jig is the short little one that has the cool little lyrics. The one about, I think, Northern California, essentially. On the Tweak Again, which musically kind of fits the title, Over the Electric Grapevine, and Captain Shiner, kind of weird little throwaway number at the end. But yeah, man, just a really solid album, a really fun album. Kind of reminds me of Green Naugahyde in that sense, and that it's a really fun, vibrant, lot of cool things going on album, kind of eclectic, but it works. It's sequenced well. It works together very, very well. Yeah, really good album. My number 2. Tales from the Punchbowl. Oh, and apparently the Punchbowl is a reference to those Barrington house parties. Yeah, because weird things happen when you drink that punch, people. Yeah, on to number 1. One of the greatest albums ever. Number 1, 1990s Frizzle Fry, their debut album. I think it's a perfect album. There's not a bad song on here. It is Primus at their absolute best, Larry at his best, Alexander at his best. I think the power trio dynamic, they have what I think the Police had when they worked well. The 3 instruments complemented each other so incredibly well without duplicating what each other would do. And while there are moments on this album where, again, you're just right in this groove that Claypool is laying down, there are also so many other moments like Groundhog's Day, even something as like Driven, a spaghetti western, Frizzle Fry, where it's the interplay between the 3 musicians and each one of them doing what they do and bringing what they bring to the best of their abilities that just make each of these songs so special. Starts off with a little, when you play the first song, it sounds like you're putting on the vinyl to Suck on This, their live album, and it starts off with the YYZ tease that they would play. And so you get that intro for less than 10 seconds before it like studio shifts into Defy the Laws of Tradition. Groundhog's Day, like a slow burner storytelling song with a really good Larry part at the end, kind of builds to like a frenzy. Too Many Puppies, awesome anti-war song. Mr. Know-It-All, one of Les's sort of like live, they call me Mr. Know-It-All, like what I do, and live it was like he stood out. Like songs like this and Put in Time, I think really made this band stand out in a live context early on in their career. Frizzle Fry, best song they've ever done, absolute genius classic. The lyrics remind me of walking through Barrington Hall at times and witnessing people going through experiences that only were happening up here in their brain and not elsewhere, and just that sort of paranoia and fear and hallucinations, and being frizzled and fried. Like, this song does a really good job musically and lyrically of capturing those type of scenes. John the Fisherman, excellent groove. Toys Go Winding Down, another ridiculous groove on in a live context to see like a whole crowd just like jamming out to the Toys Go Winding Down. Stupidly ridiculous. Put in Time, fantastic live number. Spaghetti Western, this awesome, almost Tomorrow Never Knows type drum beat over which Les sort of like talks his way through this story. Why do we do this, CG and I? Too much THC. We need new pornos. And then there's just a really nice, what always reminds me of Exposure from Peter Gabriel, of sort of an Exposure-esque jam at the end of it. And then Herald of the Rocks. One of the two songs with Tommy the Cat, which seeing them live early on was just like, this song was just stood out. It was like, had your great storytelling aspect from Les with his performance, had a nice middle section featuring Larry. Everything about it worked. Fun song live, and then a little To Defy outro. It's 50 minutes long, and it's perfect. Nothing needs to be cut. The little quirky instrumental interludes work perfectly. Everything about this album is perfect. I think it is a perfect album. A 10. I love it. I don't know why everybody else doesn't. Yeah, if you're going to check out Primus and you only want to check out one album, this will do it. This will make you happy the rest of your life. This is a stupidly fantastic album. And if you don't like this album, I can't see how you'll like Primus at all. But anyways, yeah, my number one, Frizzle Fry. That's it. That's all I got to say. Those are my thoughts on Primus albums. Yeah, a band I love. So yeah, I'm just going to say that. So let me know what I got wrong, what you agree with, what you don't agree with, why I should re-listen to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and the Fungi Ensemble. I'm not going to. But yeah, you know how comments work, people. But yeah, but more importantly, more than anything, go listen to music and enjoy music. It makes life better. But like, subscribe, share, comment, all that kind of stuff. And be safe and be peaceful. And talk to y'all later.